So, a while back I made a video discussing the shared universe of the Grand Theft Auto games through the entirety of the 6th generation of gaming, encapsulating everything from GTA 3 all the way through up until GTA Vice City stories. It was a large series of individual plots that were interconnected with recurring characters and background details going from 1984 to 2001 in universe. Or rather, from 2001 to 1984, because they started at the end. Anyways, I made the observation that it's disappointing that current-day Grand Theft Auto doesn't have the same level of connectivity, but that's mostly due to the fact that there's only been a small handful of GTA games since they moved to the HD era in 2008 with GTA 4, to the point that a game from 2008 can still be considered modern GTA. But with that said, I also wouldn't necessarily say that the HD universe isn't intertwined at all. There is some intertwining, but in a different way. Because Grand Theft Auto 4 and its two spin-offs, The Lost and the Damned starring Johnny Klebitz and The Ballad of Gay Tony starring Luis Lopez, has one of my favorite intertwined plots possibly ever. By the way, for the record, I'm going to be moving forward with the understanding that if you're watching this video, you've played these games. Because I'm about to throw out a lot of names, and there's not enough hours in the day to go in depth on exactly what everyone's role in each story is. I'm just going to be running with the assumption that you know who I'm talking about. All three of these games have concurrent stories happening pretty much simultaneously in different parts of the city to different characters, and as such, if you play through all three of these games, you'll find a ton of crossover between them. Seeing different characters from different games, seeing the same mission from different perspectives, and getting a lot of detail on lesser characters. So I wanted to shed some light on this really creative and interesting concept that Rockstar Games rolled with the triple-headed hydra that is Grand Theft Auto 4. Because it's such a fun experience to have all these alternate takes and crossover elements between all three of these games. One of the primary things it does is it gives you a bit of dramatic irony, meaning the player knows something that the characters in the game don't. Such as in The Ballad of Gay Tony, when one of the people you work for is Ray Bulgarin. Side note, in GTA 4 it was pronounced Bulgarin, but then in this game it's pronounced Bulgarin. I'm just gonna be calling him Bulgarin. If you've played these games, you'd know that Ray Bulgarin is Nico's old boss back when Nico was a human trafficker in Europe. Nico, of course, had to abandon the ship that he was captaining, which led Ray to believe that Nico had screwed him over, and now Ray wants his pound of flesh from Nico. He's the reason why everything goes to hell for Nico in Liberty City. So as you're working for him in The Ballad of Gay Tony, we as the player know that this is obviously not going to end well, and it obviously does not. Ray Bulgarin is actually the final antagonist of The Ballad of Gay Tony, and this could mean one of two things. Either they did have a basic outline of who was going to be in what story and planned each game accordingly, or they didn't have enough time or missions to properly resolve every character in GTA 4 proper, and decided to let the other games pick up the slack. Because if you play GTA 4 proper, someone like Ray Bulgarin has a lot of theoretical importance. If you only play that game, you'll be left questioning what the hell's going on, but that's because his story arc and eventual death was in The Ballad of Gay Tony. And sometimes it's not even about dramatic irony, it's about giving you different perspectives on different characters. Like Brucey, he's a major character in GTA 4 proper, being one of the people you work for and eventually one of your homies that you can do activities with. In The Ballad of Gay Tony, Luis works for a nightclub, so naturally you see Brucey heading off to the club a lot with Roman. So you know for certain that they're not talking shit when they're talking about all their bachelor activities. Matter of fact, you even technically do some work for Brucey. Sort of. His brother Maury is in town, and Tony owes Maury some money, so naturally Luis has to pick up the slack by doing some jobs for him. During this mission sequence, Brucey is constantly emasculated by his brother, which is a hard contrast from the main story mode. Because there, Brucey is an ultra-confident, macho roid monkey. But in this case, we get to see another side of him when he's shown up by his brother in every possible way except for height. No, seriously, this guy's an Oompa Loompa. Including the orange skin, thinking about it. Then you have Ashley Butler, an associate of Ray Pacino, one of the higher-ranking members of the Pegorino family. Ashley essentially gets the Lost Motorcycle Club in contact with Ray so that they can do some work for him. Particularly Johnny. Mostly in the long drawn-out sequence of events regarding the stolen diamonds, and I'm saving that bit for the end, believe me. I think Ashley is a very interesting character as far as her crossover in that storyline, because she's friends with Ray, but also is obviously a very troubled young woman, and everyone wants to help her, including Ray, but, well, you can only be helped if you want to be helped. And to that end, her most notable role in the story of these 3 games is in the mission called Roman's Holiday. As it turns out, she's racked up a lot of debt with the Russian Mafia, and in particular Dmitry Raskolov. Boy, does that name sound familiar. Basically, they're giving Johnny the choice to do an errand for them, which will clear up Ashley's debt, or they kill Ashley. What is this errand? Well, you remember how in GTA 4 there was a point in the game where Roman was kidnapped by Dmitry's men and held in a warehouse? Well, guess who does the kidnapping? That's right. Johnny and one of his associates, Malk, trap Roman outside of a gambling den, stuff him in a car, and hand him over to the Russians, which directly leads into the mission Hostile Negotiation, where Nico is lured to the warehouse and hopes to be killed by the Russians. Then, of course, there's Elizabeta, a friend of Mallory, Roman's girlfriend, then fiancée, then wife, who helps Nico get back on his feet after the Act 1 betrayal by Dmitry Raskolov. Elizabeta is a recurring character in both The Lost and the Damned and GTA 4 proper. Both Nico and Johnny do work for her. Nothing too consequential to the overall plot. I think the most consequential thing that happens is that Johnny picks up her friend Marta, who is carrying a whole bunch of drugs in her system. And then in a later call to Elizabeta, she's being raided, and you can hear her and Marta trying to dispose of the drugs that her friend smuggled into the country, which directly leads to Elizabeta being arrested. I keep finding myself wondering how far ahead it was planned to have these 2 characters be the other 2 protagonists, because you can definitely tell that Johnny and Luis were at the very least earmarked to be very important characters from very early on, because they show up but never have any of their own resolution. So there was some sort of intention to have their own stories that crossed over with the main story a lot. Nico, for example, works with Johnny multiple times through the game through mutual contacts, such as in the parallel missions Blow Your Cover in GTA 4 and Buyer's Market in The Lost and the Damned, where Elizabeta tries to set Johnny up with a buyer for some H that the Lost MC came into possession of, a mission which also includes Playboy X. Nico was more or less just a neutral enforcer in case things got hairy, and get hairy they did when it was revealed that the buyer was an undercover cop. The funny thing about the H that the Lost MC got is they sort of got it as a result of something that Nico did. So at the beginning of The Lost and the Damned, one of the members of the Lost MC, Jason Michaels, mentions that he's dating a mob daughter named Anna Faustin. He goes off to see her, but in GTA 4, her father Mikhail instructs Nico to kill his daughter's boyfriend. This results in the mission No Love Lost, where you chase after Jason and kill him along with some of his associates if you take too long to kill Jason and he's able to regroup. This death is then brought up in the mission It's War in The Lost and the Damned. It's first mentioned that a Serb or a Pole killed Jason, by which I mean a Polish person, not an actual Pole. However, Billy Gray, the leader of this chapter of the Lost MC, later insists that they got bad intel and it was actually the Angels of Death, another motorcycle gang that they were beefing with. It is, however, heavily implied, in fact all but stated, that Billy was using the death of Jason as an excuse to go after the Angels of Death. So it was only through corrupt leadership that Nico narrowly avoided the ire of a motorcycle gang. A motorcycle gang in which he's worked with several times, strangely enough. So at the behest of Billy Gray, the Lost raid the Angels of Death clubhouse, kill everyone in there, and steal a whole bunch of H that they had. However, later in attempting to ostensibly give the stuff back to the Triads, who were apparently the original owners of the H, things go south and Billy Gray accidentally gets arrested, insisting that it was Johnny who set him up. But it was actually supposed to be the other way around. You see, in the Ballad of Gay Tony, Tony and Luis are summoned by the Triads because this group among the Triads want to get a liquor license and assumed that Tony, owning 2 of the biggest clubs in town, would be able to get them one, however he's unable to. But then during this scene, Billy Gray is actually trying to organize a setup with the Triads. Billy is full tilt paranoid by this point and intends to have Johnny killed or arrested. And it's during this scene where he's setting things up with the Triads. Billy, you treacherous swine. I kind of went off on a tangent there, but while Johnny is important for appearing in multiple GTA 4 missions, Luis has somewhat more subtle involvement. He doesn't work with Nico at any point, but he does show up not once, not twice, but thrice in GTA 4 cutscenes. In his first cutscene, not only does he get a speaking role, but he also gets a name drop. Specifically, we're talking about the bank robbery mission 3-Leaf Clover. He's one of the people on the ground being held at gunpoint. This is the beginning of his story, so that during the intro of his game, he's questioned by the police about the robbery and even almost gets run over by Nico in the getaway car. Nice touch. Although while Luis doesn't appear in the intro to The Lost and the Damned, Nico actually does briefly appear, although according to the wiki, this is a minor continuity issue because this part of the game takes place in Alderney, the fourth island, but chronologically starts at a point in the story where Nico can't go to Alderney. But you can easily ignore that. So chronologically, GTA 4 proper begins roughly at the same time as The Lost and the Damned, however the Ballad of Gay Tony starts quite a ways in chronologically. Although I will say that trying to map these things out chronologically is a bit of a headache because there can theoretically be a number of missions between certain plot beats happening in, say, GTA 4 proper. Meanwhile, the same plot beats, or at least the plot beats that happen at the same time in the other two games, happen pretty much one after another without any intermediary events happening, which must have made this a pain in the ass to keep track of for the developers. Trying to map out specific events and place missions chronologically in the correct order from game to game. Like, for example, if the bank robbery that kicked off the Ballad of Gay Tony happened chronologically after the mission where Nico picked up the diamonds from the trash bag, that messes up the whole continuity, because the initial deal for the diamonds happened after the bank robbery from Luis's perspective in the Ballad of Gay Tony. So if you're not careful, it messes up the whole timeline. But there's no missing pieces or alterations to the timeline that I could notice. They knew what they were doing. Well, mostly. Thankfully though, all three final missions are pretty well self-contained, which is a good thing because you wouldn't want any crossover between GTA 4 proper and the two spin-offs, because otherwise you might have to commit one way or the other to which GTA 4 ending is canon. Although there is a bit of crossover. Ray Bulgarin's right-hand man, Timur, I don't remember how it's pronounced, offhandedly mentioned that Dimitri was killed. I believe making this chronologically the final mission in GTA 4, but interestingly, one of the things that you do in this mission is destroy some ceramic containers containing a bunch of heroin. I believe meaning that this is the same heroin that Dimitri was trying to offload in both versions of the penultimate mission in GTA 4 proper. I guess meaning that Ray gained possession of it when Dimitri died, and now it's gone. Although this doesn't necessarily confirm which ending is canon. Now that's pretty much every facet of the crossover with one exception. Now it's time to explain the diamond plot, because it's a very large, very obtuse part of the game that results in everyone suffering basically. In the very opening cutscene with Nico arriving in Liberty City in GTA 4 proper, you have the cook on the ship examining the diamonds he stole from an as yet unknown person. The diamonds that much of the game's plot centers around. However, the cook doesn't actually show up in GTA 4 proper after that. He does, however, show up in the other two games, and he intends on selling the diamonds to Tony Prince for pennies on the dollar so Tony can turn around and sell it for a higher price to help pay off his debts. Ray Pacino gets wind of this deal and uses Ashley to broker a deal with the Lost MC to steal the diamonds. So the deal is ambushed by the Lost MC. So basically, the two missions, Diamonds in the Rough from The Lost and the Damned, and Frosting on the Cake in the Ballad of Gay Tony happen at the same time. After the deal, Tony is separated from his boyfriend Evan, who has the diamonds. He's then chased down and killed by Johnny, who takes the diamonds and stashes them around in several garbage bags around the city. Meanwhile, Tony and Luis are being chased by dozens of members of the Lost. Honestly, probably more than we ever saw in The Lost and the Damned. Now Tony is screwed because he has no money and no diamonds. Meanwhile, Nico disguises himself as a garbage man and gets the diamonds. Well, Ray's associates get the diamonds and try to run off with them, but that's not important. Either way, you get them back to Ray, who then sets up a deal with the Jewish Mafia, which is apparently a thing, and this is where we see the only crossover with all three main characters on screen at the same time. In the GTA 4 mission Museum Piece and the Lost and the Damned mission Collector's Item, Nico and Johnny are tasked with working together to oversee the deal. Then the money will be distributed accordingly. However, in the mission Not So Fast, in the Ballad of Gay Tony, Luis ambushes the deal and gets the diamonds back, causing an all-out riot at the museum. So while Luis gets away in a helicopter, Johnny makes off with the money and Nico makes off empty-handed. Nico is forced to protect himself against the Jewish mob, and Johnny is forced to protect himself against Ray's men in order to stop them from reporting back to Ray to let them know that he has the money. Unfortunately, he didn't anticipate Nico being a snitch. Nico lets Ray know what happened, but Johnny denies it. But Ray naturally doesn't buy it and basically kidnaps and tortures Johnny's best friend, Jim Fitzgerald. He nearly kills both Jim and Johnny, however Johnny manages to get away and kill a whole bunch of Ray's men. Meanwhile, Ray calls up Nico and tells him to hunt down and kill Jim. It won't get his money back, but at least he'll get some satisfaction out of it. Unfortunately, Jim's design was not finalized by the time GTA 4 came out, and so he has a much more stereotypical American biker look, whereas in The Lost and the Damned, he looks like he's either South American or possibly Puerto Rican. Also, it's funny how they made me retroactively feel bad for killing Jim. He was just kind of a douchey non-character in GTA 4, but then in The Lost and the Damned, they establish his backstory and the fact that he has a wife and kid he's trying to support. Now that kid's without a father. Either way, Johnny survives the attacks, but he's informed by Ashley that Jim wasn't so lucky. During the point in which Tony and Luis have the diamonds, Luis works for Ray Bulgarin, and Ray finds out that they're the ones who have the diamonds. Unfortunately, the person who the cook stole the diamonds from just so happened to be Ray himself. So even though Luis and Tony had no idea where the diamonds came from, Ray wants blood. As demonstrated in the mission in the Crosshairs, when Ray lures Luis up to a rooftop in which can be found a box containing the cook's head. So he has to fight off a bunch of assassins, and from that point forward, Ray is the ultimate bad guy. It's at this point that Paki and Nico in GTA 4 proper kidnap an associate of Tony, or rather the daughter of the associate of Tony, Gracie Ancelotti, who I believe only showed up twice in the Ballad of Gay Tony before she was kidnapped. Tony and Luis try and figure out where Gracie is being kept by following Paki in a helicopter, and as a matter of fact, it's during this mission that Tony gets forwarded the photo that Nico took of Gracie tied up. Unfortunately, he can't save her without brokering another deal. So their options are either to sell the diamonds, which can pay back Tony's debts, but still leaves him in the crosshairs of Ray Bulgarin and also potentially lets Gracie die, give the diamonds to Ray, which leaves Tony in debt and also sours his relationship with the Ancelotti family, or use the diamonds to rescue Gracie, leaving him in debt and in the crosshairs of Ray. In the end, they choose to trade the diamonds for Gracie in another scene where the two games cross over. In GTA 4, it's the mission Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend, and in the Ballad of Gay Tony, it's the mission Ladies Half Price. They make the exchange, and everyone goes their separate ways. Aside from a mobster hanging off the back of Tony's boat when they're leaving, that's basically the extent of their involvement in the mission overall. Incidentally, during this mission, Gracie gets knocked the f*** out, which also happened in GTA 4 proper. I have no point here, I just think that's funny. However, back at the sewage plant, Ray Bulgarin shows up with his men and wants his diamonds back. This results in another giant firefight, and in the end, the mobster who ends up with the diamonds is left cornered. With his back to the wall and any result leaving him a dead man, he drops the diamonds into a garbage transport so that nobody gets the diamonds in the end. Well, that's not entirely true actually, because the diamond plot doesn't end there. Back in the Ballad of Gay Tony, after successfully killing Ray Bulgarin, Luis parachutes down to the giant monoglobe in Dukes, the place where he agreed to meet Tony. And wouldn't you know who won the pony? Some random homeless guy that Luis bumps into finds the diamonds in the trash and presumably is a very, very rich man. That's basically the end. This is definitely the most involved crossover storyline in all three of these games, encompassing a side plot that plays out through at least a third of GTA 4 and through the majority of the other two games, which isn't hard given that the other two games are 5 and 6 hours respectively. And that's the last major crossover between all three of these stories within the greater Grand Theft Auto 4 continuity. Man, what to say about this, what to say about this. Well, to me, this is just a really compelling way of telling a larger narrative like this, because one of my favorite aspects about storytelling is world building. The idea that there's a living, breathing cast of characters beyond who you interact with, each with their own stories and agendas, and that I feel is what spin-off stories like this are most useful for, being able to shed a light on minor characters, or tell the story of characters that you may have heard about in passing, if they were brought up at all. I mean, that's the funny thing. These are all the examples of crossovers that I can specifically find, but there are tons of minor examples of characters who were mentioned in passing. I remember hearing about Tony Prince in the main GTA 4 story in a random conversation. Same with someone like Yusuf Amir. It makes the whole world feel much more lived in, and really helps to flesh out a lot of characters and also show recurring characters in a new light. But at the same time, these are all stories that are self-contained enough to exist in their own right. You don't necessarily need to play the main story to get The Lost and the Damned or the Ballad of Gay Tony. It makes it a more rewarding experience when you're able to use the spin-offs to complete a puzzle that you didn't even know you were putting together, a puzzle of an entire criminal underworld, but you don't need them. Although there is a little bit of a drawback to this sort of storytelling. Having so much character crossover means that certain characters' involvement comes to a sudden end in one game because the character's conclusion happened in another game, which leaves certain experiences feeling a bit hollow. The most egregious of this would be Ray Boccino's involvement in The Lost and the Damned. Ray could arguably be considered the main antagonist of that game. Yeah, Billy Gray ends up being the final boss, but his involvement in the story after his arrest is fairly minimal, whereas Ray is front and center for a lot of the game. Unfortunately, because he's definitively killed off by Nico at the behest of Jimmy Pegorino in the main plot, it creates sort of the storytelling equivalent of a predestination paradox. It means he can't have a proper payoff in that game, and so in the story he has to suddenly disappear. His eventual fate is hand-waved by Thomas Stubbs in the cutscene leading into the final mission.
Don't worry about him.
Why not?
Apparently he and a lot of his associates under some serious observation and in the process of imploding. They'll either be dead or inside within a month or so. Best thing you can do? Stay away from him.
And then there's Ray Bulgarin. Ray Bulgarin, in theory, is Nico's biggest nemesis outside of Dmitry Rascalov because Ray is the person who Nico has all this history with in the Balkans, and Ray is the one who pretty much kickstarted the downfall of Nico's time in Liberty City, so realistically, Ray Bulgarin should have had a larger role in the main plot of GTA 4. But he only shows up, I think, 2 times. But that's because he ends up being the main antagonist for the Ballad of Gay Tony. He gets definitively killed off by Luis, who knew him for all of like 5 missions. It's kind of funny if you think about it. It almost feels like the ending of GTA 5, where every character is going after a specific antagonist, except where the different protagonists don't even realize that's what they're doing. In fact, I kind of wonder if the 3-story setup is kind of what inspired the 3 protagonists in GTA 5. Plus, it's also worth mentioning that if you do have this much character crossover with lesser characters in some stories acting as protagonists and antagonists in other stories, it means that inevitably there's going to be one story that feels like the runt of the litter. Especially because the main story of GTA 4 is where the vast majority of character conclusions happen. So more than likely, most of the characters that cross over in the other 2 games will have to disappear suddenly, and in that respect, there's going to be one story with a lot of characters that cross over that ends up feeling very dissatisfying because of the lack of character conclusion. And in that respect, I think The Lost and the Damned is definitely the runt of the litter of these 3 games. No less than 3 characters are killed off screen, all during the events of GTA 4 proper. With the amount of this game that happens off screen, I'm reminded of this one video by Alistair Beckett King.
All the most exciting bits in a play happen out there, in the wings, in the bit of the theatre you can't see.
Man, sucks to be Johnny. Aside from the story of his own game playing second fiddle a lot of the time, he also gets absolutely shafted in the overall series because he's unceremoniously killed by Trevor Phillips in GTA 5. Matter of fact, you even apparently have the option to kill Ashley in that mission, and if you don't kill her, it's mentioned in the radio later on that she died of a drug overdose. That's just tragic. I guess I should probably mention GTA 5 in this because there is a bit of crossover between GTA 4 and GTA 5, but not that much. Characters will show up in very ancillary fashion, but it's never really worth dwelling on. It's not nearly as robust as the crossovers in GTA 4 or the crossovers in the 6th generation games, so it's really barely worth mentioning. Either way, I just love how all 3 of these stories are compelling in their own right, but they're each intertwined in such a way that it makes them such a rewarding experience to complete. It's like fan service, but in such a way that gives you closure on things that maybe you didn't necessarily care about because they were minor details that didn't necessarily matter in the end. But it makes the experience feel so much more whole in the end. Certainly better than leaving large chunks of the game incomplete and then finishing the story in a series of spin-off comics. Infamous. Yes, I'm still bitter about that. Well, I hope you enjoyed this little walkthrough of the extended story of Grand Theft Auto 4 and its various intertwined stories as much as I enjoyed making it. I like shedding light on non-standard storytelling like this, so I want to ask you guys, are there any other games you know of that have this sort of setup? Multiple simultaneous stories interweaving. I'd like to hear it because I can't get enough of this sort of stuff, but that's it for me. So if you like what I do here and want to support the channel, you can like this video, leave a comment telling me what you think, subscribe, and hit the notification icon so you're always up to date on what I'm doing. And if you want to support the channel in a more direct fashion, you can pledge to my Patreon for unique perks and rewards such as early access, Discord benefits, exclusive content, and more, along with these fine folks right here. And an extra special thank you to Dick Kickham, Ga004, FarmCat84, Raph, Ranger X, Ty Trovey, Weird Webster, and Monsieur Thenardier for going above and beyond. Elsewise than that, I've been the King of Snark Style right here on Tactical Bacon Productions, and I will see you next time. Stay crispy, my friends.